Good afternoon. So we are learning the book of Kings. We finished chapter 3, but I do want to go over a few things that we left hanging. We had a few questions at the end of chapter 3. One of the questions that was bothering me was, why did Shlomo HaMelech, why did King Solomon, after he had this great dream or this vision, where did he go to immediately afterwards? He came to Jerusalem before the Ark of Hashem, and he brought these sacrifices, oilos and shlamim, burnt offerings, peace offerings. Where was he when he had the dream? In Givon. He was by the main altar. So why did he rush back when he had this great opportunity? You would think that maybe he would bring sacrifices there, more sacrifice there. I understand he brought already before the dream, but now that he had the dream and he wants to thank Hashem, I would think that he would want to do it there where it's more apropos. In other words, you have two options. One is where the Mishkan is, that's in Givon, and the other is to go back to Yerushalayim, which I could understand. There's some, there's importance at this point to Yerushalayim, even though the Beis Hamikdash is not built yet. But the main Mishkan is really Givon. So why did he rush back to Yerushalayim before maybe bringing at least some sacrifices in Givon? You hear my question?
Yeah.
I'm going back to chapter 3 and verse 15. Look at chapter 3, verse 15. Shlomo woke up, and behold, he had been a dream. And when he came to Yerushalayim, he stood before the Ark of the Covenant, and he brought up these burnt offerings, elevation offerings, and peace offerings, and he made a feast for his servants. So the question is, it would seem that it would be appropriate to celebrate even before. He should, right away. He should have brought more sacrifices in Givon, where the main place of the altar was at this point. And one of the commentaries explains something very interesting, and this is I'm mentioning it because it really changes. It gives us a whole new historical fact, and that is that what actually happened here was the end of Givon's element of being the main bama, the main altar. It ended right here. Shlomo HaMelech is planning on building the Beis Hamikdash, is now dismantling. He dismantled the altar in Givon, and he decided to bring it to Jerusalem at this point. And that's why he's going to Jerusalem and going to bring all the sacrifices there, because this was actually a revolutionary moment. Let me just mute everyone. I'm sorry. I hear all this noise. Mute. This was like a moment of change. A major change was happening where Shlomo HaMelech is now moving the altar that was in Givon, and he's now moving it to Yerushalayim. And if you look in the calculations of how long the altar, the Mishkan, the tabernacle was meant to be in Givon, and how long it was meant to be in Shiloh, if you add up all these calculations, it actually ends off with, you end up with a question. Because if you calculate the calculations of how many years it was in Shiloh and how many years it was in Noiv and Givon, if you add them together, 369 years in Shiloh, and Noiv and Givon was 57 years, it ends up that there's a 7-year discrepancy that it took Shlomo to build the Beis Hamikdash. Where was the altar then? Why are we only counting 57 years in Noiv and Givon when there was that ends by the beginning of Shlomo HaMelech's building Beis Hamikdash, but it took him 7 years. So you have to, where was the Mishkan during those 7 years of building the Beis Hamikdash? Where was the Mishkan then during those 7 years? So it actually fits with this idea that it actually was no longer in Noiv and Givon those 7 years. It was moved already to Yerushalayim. And that is why Shlomo is not bringing more sacrifices in Givon, because Givon is over. He's now bringing the Mishkan to Yerushalayim, which basically means the main altar is now going to be in Yerushalayim. It's contrary to what we think of historically. It's not like a famous. It's not a well-known fact. It's a common understanding is that the Mishkan was in Givon until the Beis Hamikdash was built, and here we're saying no. It was in Givon until the beginning of the Beis Hamikdash, until the start. Once the start of the Beis Hamikdash, once Beis Hamikdash began being built, it was no longer in Givon. Yes, Ben.
When I read now the sentence, I saw that the Aron Kodesh was in Jerusalem.
Well, the Aron is in Jerusalem.
Came to Jerusalem and stood before the Aron Kodesh.
That is correct.
First he said he came to Jerusalem. Then he said it stood before the Aron Kodesh.
Correct. And what the reason why you see that is because the Aron was in Jerusalem from before, but the Mishkan was not. The Mishkan was in Givon. The Aron was actually in Yerushalayim, as we learned about before. They traveled. It took two trips. The first time Uziel passed away, and David HaMelech was nervous. They stopped it. They stopped the whole transport to Jerusalem of the Ark. But then they ended up doing it a second time. And then ultimately it was brought to...
I thought the Mishkan and the Aron Kodesh were together.
Not at the end. At the end, it was not together.
I see. Okay.
And it was two separate places. So the Mishkan was the more appropriate place for Karbanis. That was the main altar. When he brought the Ark to Jerusalem, he made an altar there as well. So it wasn't wrong to bring Karbanis in Jerusalem, but if you want to know where the Bama Gedola, the official place of bringing sacrifices were, that was in Givon. And before that in Noiv, and before that in Shiloh, there was the major place. And now in the time of Shiloh, you weren't allowed to bring. In time of Shiloh, you were not allowed to bring sacrifices
in Jerusalem,
anywhere else. It had to be in Shiloh. But in time of Noiv and Givon, you were allowed to bring sacrifices in other places. So that's an interesting point, and it answers the question that bothered us, in addition to answering that other calculation, that question of calculations as well. Then the other question that we were bothered with was, why are we calling these women Zoinos? Zoinos means prostitutes. These two women, they came to Shlomo with this issue of whose child is the child. And, it's a very surprising story in general, this whole story. What exactly was Shlomo's insight that really showed how brilliant Shlomo was? But the first question is, so why are they called Zoinos? Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say because two women living together, and then both of them are pregnant without men in the house, what else would you call them?
Uh-huh. So the understanding would be that it doesn't have to be that way. Their husbands unfortunately passed away, and it was a
It could be,
tragic.
but not. But normally, it's not happening to two people that live together.
Okay, that's a good point. That's one way of understanding it. I would argue the opposite way, that if they were prostitutes, they probably tried to prevent pregnancy, because and
I'm sure they tried,
stop their
but they
business.
didn't succeed.
But both didn't succeed at the same time.
That's what it looks like.
That's what I'm saying. So in other words, both husbands died at the same time is also a little, it's the same thing. They both got pregnant.
Yeah.
They both of their but in any event, that's a thought. That's what you're saying. One of the understandings is that when their husbands were around, they were tznius, they were modest, and when their husbands passed away, they became zoinos, and they, it caused them to I guess, out of maybe anger or pain. People have different ways of dealing with tragedies, and they turn to, or for money purposes, they ended up becoming zoinos, prostitutes. There is another Kabbalistic idea that's mentioned, and that is that at this moment, there was a very powerful element of submissiveness. In other words, there were two sources of klipa, of impurity. One is called lilis, and the other is called naama. This is Kabbalistic. And these two women, when they came to King Solomon, they actually became submissive, and they became under his dominion. And until this point, they were like free to, they were sort of like free agents. They were able to do whatever they wanted, and they are the source of all zoinos, of all the impurity in the world, of all the prostitutes in the world. The prostitutes get their energy from these two spirits, these two demons. They're two demons, so to speak, and these are the two demons that we're talking about here. That they looked like humans and so on, and they were really two demons that became under and they're the source of all zoinos, of all prostitutes, and they became submissive under the authority of King Solomon. And when he subdued them, in other words, when he gave his verdict, actually King Solomon thought that he had, in some sense, elevated the world from this lowliness. And that's why he married so many women, because he felt that he had accomplished what was needed to remove the major impurity, or this major source of impurity, and therefore he felt it wasn't a problem for him to marry so many women. So that is a Kabbalistic idea that I just want to mention. It's brought in different Kabbalistic books. This idea of the two spirits, and it's based on the Medrash. The Medrash says that these were ruchos, that these two women, one of the Medrash, and one of the opinions in the Medrash is that they were ruchos, spirits or demons, and that is these are the two women. There is another opinion that's a little more well known in the Medrash, and that is that these two women were Yevamais. What do I mean, Yevamais? There's a law in the Torah that if someone if a man passes away without children, his wife is meant to marry his brother. And in this situation, both of them had children. But because one of the children died, there is reason to subject that woman, because one of the children died, there's reason to subject that the other woman, one of the women, to needing to marry her husband's brother. So the example here, and I don't want to confuse people, so let's pick an example in the Torah. We have Moses' wife, her name was Tzipporah. And Moses' mother, her name was Yocheved. So imagine if Yocheved had a child, a baby, and Tzipporah had a baby.
No, I do, but I'm sorry.
Let me mute everyone again. I'm sorry for this. I don't know why people unmute. I don't know. So, so let's just say that Tzipporah had a baby and Yocheved had a baby. Now, Tzipporah has no need to do Yibum because she has a baby. Her husband gave birth to, they have a child. Tzipporah, Yocheved has no need to do Yibum because she has a child. But when that child dies, all of a sudden, she's going to need to do Yibum. So let's pick, for example, Tzipporah, the daughter-in-law. Yocheved is the mother-in-law. Tzipporah is the daughter-in-law. If Tzipporah's child passed away, now Tzipporah is going to need to wait to do Yibum. She's got to wait until Yocheved's baby, who's her husband's brother, until he grows up. So she's not allowed to marry anyone for 13 years till he becomes an adult. She's got to wait till he becomes an adult, able to either do chalitza or yibum. So she's got to wait either. I'm not sure if yibum you're allowed to do before 13. I know chalitza you have to wait till 13, but even if you could do it before 13, I think you definitely would have to wait till 9 or till older. So she would have to wait years until she can get remarried. So Tzipporah, the daughter-in-law, is very not interested in having to wait to get married. She's going to be stuck for the next, who knows how many years, possibly 13 years, until she can get remarried. And therefore, because she's going to need to either marry this baby, who's going to become an adult, or she's going to do chalitza, which is a divorce from this baby. It's a type of divorce. But that's the rule in the Torah, that she would need to marry this child of Yocheved. So according to this understanding, and this is brought down in a number of Sfarim, it's based on this medrash, that they were mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. And basically, both of them are widows, and so if Tzipporah's child passed away, so Tzipporah would be interested in claiming that Yocheved's baby is really her baby. What would she gain by that? Now she can get remarried as soon as she wants, or she has to wait 2 years until the baby's weaned. There are rules about that, but she could get married pretty soon. So in other words, if her baby is the live baby and Yocheved's baby is the baby that passed away, then she doesn't have any problem of Yibum, and Yocheved also has no problem of Yibum because Yocheved has a grandson. But if Tzipporah's baby is the one that died and Yocheved's baby is the one that's alive, So then Tzipora is going to need to wait until Yocheved's baby grows up so she can either marry him or she can have a chalitza done by him. So that's the rule of Yibum. And that is the understanding over here that Tzipora stole the baby from Yocheved. I'm just giving these names, these two names, because it makes it easier, a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. So Tzipora stole the baby from Yocheved in order to be able to get out of waiting to get remarried. So that's why Tzipora would have done this. And so that's the story over here. Now, the other opinion is they were actual zoinos, they were actual prostitutes, and being that way, that's how they had the chutzpah. Someone who's a zoina, who's a prostitute, has a certain audacity, and that's why she would have the chutzpah to do such a cruel type of thing, to steal a child. Now, when you take this scenario, when you take this scenario further, you start seeing a different picture of the story of how Shlomo HaMelech figured out, how did he really know who was the right one? Now, one of the commentaries brings up this idea. He says, Shlomo HaMelech knew from before who's correct. He didn't need to do this trick of bringing the knife. The knife was just to show people that his view is correct. But he already knew, he could tell who was the right child. So how could he tell? What do you think? What would be a way of figuring out whose child is whose? He says very practical ideas. Number one, he was able to tell from the face, from the form of the face and the looks of the child. He could tell who the mother was. Number two, he was able to tell which mother was the type to end up lying on her own baby and causing the baby to die. And he could tell from their personality, from their traits, and he could tell which one was not able to do that, which one is capable of taking the baby. He could see from their face and from their emotions, the way they were talking. He was able to tell who was more responsible of a mother and who wasn't. The other thing he was able to tell was, listen to the story. Think about this story. Who would make sense that they would steal the baby from the other one? It would make sense that the daughter-in-law stole the baby from the mother-in-law in order not to have to do yibum. The other one has no reason to steal the baby because the other one has no issue of doing yibum. It's only that it's this one has what to gain from doing this. Why would someone steal someone else's baby just because their baby passed away? It's not really, the most consoling type of thing when a person's baby, God forbid, passes away, to go steal a baby from someone else. But in order to save herself from yibum, from having to wait years until she could get remarried, that would be logical, maybe, for her to steal the baby. This way, the Beis Din will think that she's exempt from yibum. She could get married soon thereafter. Yes, Ben.
I thought there was a day difference between the births.
There were a few days difference between the births, but
so
what is that?
I would think that the one that had the baby first, would have a chance to sleep on the baby. The one that just had the baby, she was busy having the baby. She didn't sleep on the baby.
All it takes is one night. It takes 1 minute. sleep, fall asleep. I mean, I don't know if there's
So maybe
that.
that's how he knew, the difference.
Yeah, I don't know if that's, I don't know if it's such an issue. All he needs is all she needs is a short amount of time to sleep next to the baby, and she rolls on top of the baby.
Yeah, but there's a difference between a 1-day-old baby and a few-day-old baby. So.
Really? That if a mother sleeps on the baby? Okay.
Not that she sleeps on the baby, but I think you can tell the difference between a 1-year-old baby, a 1-day-old baby, and a 5-day-old baby. I could tell. I don't know.
Oh, that's what you're saying. That they could tell maybe the difference between. He could tell whose baby was whose based on
who would have a chance
based on the age.
And who would have a chance to sleep with a baby for a few nights, So,
really? You think you could tell the difference between how many days old? I don't know about that.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, listen, that was Shlomo HaMelech. He was able to do that, maybe. Good, okay, yeah, maybe that's it. He could tell. Actually, it's a good point. You're right. I guess you're right. Shlomo HaMelech, this was part of Shlomo's ability to see things that regular person maybe doesn't see. So all of these things led to Shlomo HaMelech's ability to discern who was saying the truth and who wasn't. And in order to do that, in order to prove it to everyone else, he made this trick up. They'll bring a knife and we're going to cut the baby in half, and then we'll see. Now, that was really just to show everyone that that he obviously was correct. His initial understanding was exactly correct. Now, there are still some questions that are unanswered. One question is, how foolish was this woman to say, cut the baby in half. That's right. If not yours, not mine, no problem. How could someone reach such a stupidity and think that they're gonna, besides the cruelty and evil, but how do you have such stupidity to think that the king is gonna think you're right and you're saying the truth when you say such a foolish thing? In addition to cruelty, which is another story, but the foolishness of it. Where does someone become so foolish? Yes, let's Yisrael, Yehudis, yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's a very simple thing that the woman who actually gave birth to that baby would rather see the baby alive, even with another person, than to see the baby killed or disposed of. I mean, in some way. The natural mother would keep that baby alive, even if another woman was going to take care of it, rather than see something happen to it.
Right, of course. There's no question about it. That's the thing.
And that's why, and that woman, and letting her friend say, okay, let my friend take the baby, don't cut the baby in half, was trying to keep her own child alive. And therefore he knew that was the mother.
That was the trick.
Well, but it is so surprising. What would Shlomo HaMelech have done had the other mother been normal and said, no, don't? Both mothers would have said, don't kill the baby. No, give the baby to the other. What would Shlomo HaMelech done then? You know what I mean? Did he think she was so foolish? He really thought she was going to do it. She was foolish, but did he really think he knew that she was going to be so foolish to say that? How did he know how foolish she was going to be? A normal person would never have done anything like that. What was, you know what I mean? Like what was he expecting to, what was he going to do if the woman wasn't, didn't act as foolishly? If she had a little bit of a seichel, she would have, you have to be really foolish to come up like that. But Anna, tell us, what do you think?
First of all, I agree that it could be a facial details, or it could be a little bit different in a couple of days of, growing for a baby, but nothing is as strong prove as a motherly instinct. That's why it was, in my opinion, 100% the best way to see who is the mother. Someone who would someone is the mother who would never put a child's life in jeopardy, regardless of any other consequences. That's my opinion. It's not necessarily, moral or intelligence or any other reasons. It's just an instinct that really carries mother to protect her child regardless of what. That's why I think he chose the best way of checking who is the real mother. Now,
Yeah.
the second.
But I want to argue on that.
That's what I was saying.
My
That's what-
argument to that is that it's so far from thinking anyone would even think otherwise. You don't need to be a mother to say something like that.
Or you would be surprised how many examples of people who are stealing babies from the whatever hospital, or making sure that their husband does not know whose child it is, because a person who is going into this procedure to steal a child or to take someone else's baby, she already had a very, very odd way of thinking about this. It's just her selfishness, her own motivations were above any of her other motivations. Now, because it was not, maybe she did not have children and she never experienced the motherly instinct, which is something that is very possible. That's why I'm not.
But see, that I don't. Yeah, the motherly instinct I don't think is necessary here. But your first point is an interesting point that you say, because she already showed herself to be off,
Right,
strange,
right.
and a little crazy and cruel and so on. Okay, that's an interesting point that you're saying. Okay, I
really
like that. Just one second, Anna. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
I think that Susan wants to talk about specifically this point. Susan, did you want to discuss this specific area? Then you'll mention
I just put in the chat postpartum depression.
Oh,
which is a very serious illness, and nobody has mentioned it. It can make a woman nuts.
Okay. I've never found that.
Ben is right. I feel like Ben is really on the right track by looking at a baby, because also remember, the baby doesn't see that well in the first few days. All right. And maybe by touch and by scent, the baby. What I'm saying is that the mothers, or either both women or one of the women, had that serious illness. And that's why she said, sure, cut the baby in half.
Gotcha. Okay, good point. Postpartum
Can I
depression.
answer your last question?
Yes.
What
Ben.
would you do if both of them said, don't cut the baby?
Oh, yeah. What's the answer to that?
Then you would look at all the other things that he probably noticed and would judge by that.
Okay, I'm going to get into that soon, but I cut Anna off because I thought she's going to jump to the next point. Is that right? Do you have another thing you wanted to mention, Anna? I can't hear you. You're muted. You're muted.
You have to unmute.
I was just gonna say, I think definitely it was just because of the maternal instinct, let the baby live, and the other person,
Anna, you muted.
baby died, and was to let the baby be killed, because she was very probably extremely disturbed by the loss of her child. She was probably going through a horrible experience, having her child die.
So that could have been a cause to do something.
She acted irrationally and not nicely, but I think it's all purely motherly instinct, and I think only a woman can know that.
Okay. Thank you.
Children, and you do anything to save a baby. Right.
So only someone who went through such a tragedy is totally off track. You can't really blame.
So the baby just died. So it should definitely be off.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Yudis. Yeah. Okay. Anna, sorry for cutting you off.
But you see her decision. Okay, I understand, and it's very common, unfortunately, the condition that some of the, mothers who just gave birth are going through as a depression and all kinds of different mental problems. But at the same time, to be so cruel and ask to cut the baby in half, it's all sound like it's not an illness, it's just an evil kind of motivations or personality inclinations.
Right. Okay.
That's right. That's, I agree with everything that Susan, and I did not hear the second name. I agree with both of their opinions completely, but we are talking about Yehuda's, about King Solomon's decision at age of whatever, 13, 14, to make such a wise move to really go into the middle of the situation and find the best way of dealing with it. That was almost, I was always mesmerized by that. I know my grandma and my mom were telling me about the story so many times because it's one of the most well-known fact about his judgment. And that's why all of us somehow came to the same conclusions, that he found the best proof. Mother never sacrifice her child, regardless of what it is. Where someone who does it for different purpose and who is not a parent to this child can have very different motivations.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry, Mordechai, you've been holding your hand up for a long time.
Yeah, it could also be that Dayanim have a certain siyata dishma to ask the proper questions. Like there's a story about two litigants who once came to a particular sage regarding who owned a particular currency note. And after hearing their sides, the sage called over his Rebbitzin because it was the case was being held in his house, and he whispered to the Rebbitzin, I wonder why you're neither of these mentioned that there's a fold on one of the corners of the currency note. And then all of a sudden one of the litigants says, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that one of the corners of the note is folded. And then he said, well, it so happens that this one does not have a fold, so it must be the other guys.
Right. Right. Very cute story. Yeah, that's it's a cute trick of testing someone. Okay. Yes, Moshe. Nina.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know much about women who lactate, but he may have been able to determine who the baby was, that belonged to the mother, based on the fact that the baby would have been attracted to the mother who originally who was breastfeeding that baby. The baby would have gravitated even without the, so I don't know whether or not this is something that's mentioned, but it seems to me that that could have been
an interesting thought. Yeah, it's a thought. Thank you for sharing your thought. Yeah. So in any event, so that sort of touches upon the question of the foolishness of the statement of allowing King Solomon to cut the baby chas v'shalom in half. Now, the question that I had asked was, what was the king going to do if this woman answered like a normal human being would answer, and that is, no, don't cut the baby in half, like any normal person would have done, whether it's their baby or not, even if it's their enemy's baby. How could, it's not something that a normal human being would ever say. So how was he going to judge it based on that? So one of the commentaries mentions that he would have been able to see who is more rushing to save the baby and rushing to beg the king not to cut the baby, and who is just saying it more out of just a statement, and who's emotionally overly concerned. And based on that, he would have been able to also tell who was the baby's mother and who isn't. The mother that screams, no, absolutely not, she's going to be the real mother. The other mother says, no, just, don't do it. That's just a normal human being. But the mother who rushes and screams and begs and starts crying, she's going to be the, so based on that, he was, but the question is, so how did this, the question of how did this woman have even such words to come out of someone's mouth? I just got to read the Hebrew words. It's just shocking that someone could even say such a thing. That gam li gam loch lo yiyeh gzeiru. To say such words about a human being, not me and not you, it shouldn't be. Not for me and not for you. Baby is not for me and not for gam li gam loch lo yiyeh. It won't be for me. It won't be for you. Gzeiru, cut the baby in half. So it's just shocking. So we had a few answers, a few explanations here, where postpartum depression, having such a tragedy, maybe could make someone totally crazy. But the fact that she herself even thought of stealing the other baby shows that she is she's off. She has a certain cruelty to her. And the truth is, I did see one of the commentaries mentions that idea that once a person does something so, once a person has such cruelty, it could go further and further, and there's like almost, you don't know where it's going to take, where it's going to end. That once a person acts so cruel, it has the ability to take them into such a terrible state, a terrible place of even being able to say such things. It's like the evil inclination gets a hold of you, and it can just take you. It could take someone that far.
Rabbi,
Okay,
David wants to say something.
Yeah, David. Yes, David.
Yeah, I think that what you said before, Rabbi, was the most insightful. That I think that Shlomo HaMelech thought that they would both say, no, don't cut the baby. But he would judge it based on the fact that one would be very frantic, don't cut the baby, and the other one would be, don't cut the baby. That's not fair. That's not a good thing.
No, that answers what would have been in that case. But the question that I was trying to get an answer for is, how did this woman have the foolishness to even say what she said? That's the other question. In other words, that your answer, the question that I answered earlier was, what would he have done had she not been foolish? But the question is, how does someone reach such a level of foolishness, of cruelty in addition, but just to say such words?
I think it might also be like what Susan said, that if a person is so extremely depressed over the situation, she might say something that's psychotic, because sometimes depression and psychosis, craziness, insanity can go hand in hand, which means to say that that person could have really been the mother, and she would have been so depressed and so crazy over the thing, she would have said, "Oh, cut the baby in half." And that might be the true mother, even though it's counter to logic.
Interesting. I'm not familiar, thank God, with the with that type of issue. So I don't, you worked in a hospital, David. I guess you saw certain things like that. But,
I was a psychiatric nurse for over 40 years.
Right. Okay. Well, getting back to the final question is, where does this fit in Jewish law. According to Jewish law, you need to have witnesses. You need to have proof in order to make a verdict. And here, Shlomo HaMelech is making a decision. Who's the mother? He's taking the child away from one woman and giving the child to a different woman without any witnesses, which seems to go against the regular law of that you need two witnesses to be able to prove and to be able to take something away from someone who from the person who is possessing it, person who's holding it. You can't take something away from someone if they have it unless you have two witnesses. And here, Shlomo HaMelech is doing just that. He's come up with his conclusion, contrary to maybe what doctors might have said, that person might be psychotic and whatever, right? And he's saying, well, I've come up with the conclusion that this is the right mother, and I'm going to give the baby, take a baby away from the woman who's holding it, and claim, I'm sure this is the mother, but that doesn't fit Jewish law. The Jewish law is that there's the concept of two witnesses, and let's see if there's any witnesses. Then maybe we could do something like that. So the commentaries bring they try to answer this question. One of them is the Rush, who's a famous source of Jewish law, one of the big codifiers of Jewish law. And he brings a revolutionary idea that, and it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, it's brought in the Torah, that when a judge is 100% sure, he's able to even take money away from someone who's holding it, or take possession away from someone who's holding it. And he says that this has a source in the words of the prophets. Where do you think that source is? That if some judge is so convinced, is 100% sure that this is right, he can do this. He has the right to take money away from someone, or possession away from someone that's holding it, even without witnesses. This is a revolutionary idea because it doesn't fit in the regular laws of Chosh and Mishpat, of the monetary laws. And he says, I have a source in Divrei Kabbalah. And the source is this story of King Solomon. King Solomon did just that. He took away from someone who was in possession of a child, and King Solomon was convinced 100% that this is the right mother. And he said, "That's it. We can even without witnesses, we can now give the child to the real mother, even though even though there's no witnesses." Now, the Radvaz argues on it. The Radvaz, he takes a different approach, and he says that King Solomon was able to see who was correct, and and he says, and even though according to Jewish law, you can't take money away from, or possession away from someone who's holding it, but when the woman said that the baby's not mine, the baby's not yours, you can cut the baby in half, at that point, she took away her possession of the baby. And he says, that moment, the baby was no longer in her possession. because she agreed to have the baby, to allow the baby to be killed. So she now removed her possessive state, the status that the baby was in her possession. It was removed from her, and therefore King Solomon was allowed to give it back to the other mother.
Rabbi?
That's one point. And I just want to say the other thought that he has is that it was a Hiras Shah. This was a special moment, and that this is not something that we can learn from. It was a special moment in Jewish history that this was the psak, that this was the law for this moment. It was a Hiras Shah, like a teaching of a moment, that it was like a prophecy that this is what he was supposed to do. And more than that, we can't compare any other cases to that. So according to him, according to the Radvaz, this is not a general rule that we can learn from. This was a unique case. But the Rush wants to bring this in Jewish law, like this would be the law. So this is a story that has a certain has certain outcomes based on how you learn it, and how Shlomo HaMelech was able to do this. Yes, Penina.
Rabbi, yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
What I want to say is that when the woman agreed to have it cut in half, that was the destruction. That would have been the destruction of, even if it was a chattel, but this, of course, is a human life, but she agreed to its destruction. So that automatically vitiated her property rights in it. In other words, if she's agreeing to its destruction, she has no more right to its ownership.
Right. Thank you for explaining that. Yes. Yes. Good point. Thank you. Yeah, that's what the way this commentary explains it, the Radvaz. Yes, David.
I know what I'm going to say doesn't make any sense, but we say with a beis din, if there's a beis din that says that a person is guilty of murder and it's 100% that all the judges say that he's guilty of murder, that's a questionable decision. There has to be at least one judge that says that there's a question there. No?
Yeah, then there is such a concept that you don't give the death penalty if no one can say anything positive, right? If everyone agrees that, you don't give the death penalty. Well, one of the explanations is that it's like worse, that he deserves a worse penalty than the death penalty. But that's one way of looking at it. But how are you connecting that to here?
Because if Shlomo HaMelech is 100% convinced of this fact, and there's nothing in his mind that can say anything to the opposite view, then maybe it's similar. Or is that crazy?
I don't know. I don't know such an idea.
I figured I'd try it.
Yeah, something to think about. Let me see who else had a question. Ben, did you have a question? Okay, Anna.
I was going to say that even in a modern court procedure, yes, we have, prosecutor and defense. Everybody explains the different details, different points of view. And even after the jury had a final verdict, it's still up to a judge to make a final decision. Yes, they definitely consider everything that happened, but from my understanding is that it's still a judge that makes the final conclusion, what would be the punishment. That's why I think it's even in the modern court system, it's still the final decision, and the prevailing kind of the main force is a judge.
A judge, yeah, but that doesn't so you're saying that it makes it in American law, whatever the judge thinks is the way to go is fine, but not necessarily does that work in Jewish law.
Yes,
there also has to be a good enough proof. In Jewish law, you need more of a proof. That's why we're surprised. That's why this is a surprising case. We're going to allow it to the verdict to take place, even though we don't have a full proper proof that you normally need with two witnesses. We don't have.
Sometimes in a critical situation, let's see, it's a battle, it's a war, or someone is making decision to keep alive or to kill in a matter of seconds. if here is the life of a human baby could be jeopardized, I think that I really believe that his decision had a merit, had a good explanation.
So you want to explain that it could be that it was not a matter of Jewish law. This was a life or death, because if you give the baby to the wrong mother, she won't take care of the baby properly.
Right. And not only that, it's just,
but
the situation is pretty critical. What if this woman, because she's maybe not in a right stage of mind, she could just, take a knife and kill the baby to end all of her troubles? That's possible too. I think it's a unique situation. Not that I want to approve making decisions without any witnesses and to have any specific proof, but this is a special situation, in my opinion.
Right. So that would be a totally different avenue of understanding the story, that the verdict is not based on regular Jewish law. It's simply an act of protecting the safety of the baby, whether right or wrong. The baby needs to be safe. So even if that is the right mother, but we need safety for the baby, so we don't have to give a verdict. We could just say, for safety purposes, we're going to give the baby to the mother who's more mentally stable. And and so that really that changes the whole story a little. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that Shlomo HaMelech was necessarily correct in his verdict. It was more that he did a good deed by saving the life of the baby, which is it's a nice interpretation. Don't get me wrong; it's an interesting interpretation, but I don't know if it's like the accepted. I don't know if it fits really the wording and so on. But it's definitely interesting.
Very often when we study Jewish law, Rabbi Warnick is telling us that if it is a situation of life and death, if it is harmful to the health of the person, then many exceptions of the rules are available.
It's not exceptions. See, that's the mistake. It's not exceptions to the rules. This is the rule. The rule is that life is, the most important thing is life. So the part of the laws are that the life comes before any other law. Okay, yes, Ben. My time is just.
I wanted to let Anna go first because I knew she's on the subject. I wanted to talk about something previous that you said about Solomon going to Jerusalem and continuing with the Korbanot. I wanted to say he probably wanted to show that Jerusalem is the future place for doing the Korbanot. He was going to build the Beit HaMikdash there, and he wants to bring the Kedusha back to Jerusalem, or to Jerusalem,
Right.
So I think that was his move,
Right. And that's not so surprising, but what was surprising was at least you're here in Givon right now. You just had this great revelation. How about bringing some sacrifices in the most apropos place at this moment, which is Givon?
But he did some of the Korbanot there.
The night before, the day before he had the revelation.
Now is the time to move it to Jerusalem.
But you would think that he would have brought some sacrifices in the morning after being so excited over this revelation, that he would have done what he should have here. And then, of course, when he goes to Jerusalem, wants to make a party for his family, for his all the people, so on, fine. But at least don't minimize the importance of Givon, unless, as you're explaining, which is unless you're following this way of understanding, that this is the moment where actually he is changing, and Givon is no longer going to be the place. We're now taking it to Yerushalayim. Not that Yerushalayim will be the place. Yerushalayim now is
right. He's moving the Kedusha
this
to
moment.
Jerusalem.
This moment is becoming the new place of Jerusalem. I did just want to mention one last thought on this initial concept. You know what? It's 4:00. We'll do it at Mitzvah Hashem next week. Okay. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hey.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Nice to see you
Have a
all.
good day,
Thank you,
everybody.
Rabbi.
Rabbi.